Williams show. Ellie's got me helping her, and so I've got the whole show today. And we talked yesterday about some information. We were going to go do a deep dive on a timeline, but it turns out that other people that have bigger staffs have done more research than us. So we're just going to go over the high points and then refer you to a couple shows that cover all the very fine points of what's going on. The one I'm thinking of particularly is Dan Bongino. He really covered it well about what we're going to talk about. So today we're going to talk about the secret military bases that are in Ukraine along the Russian border. Now, they were started by Victoria Nuland way back during the Obama administration while Hillary Clinton was still running for office. So that gives you an idea. She was Secretary of State. You can remember we came, we saw, we whatever. She came back from some trip claiming she'd been shot at. So you get the whole idea of what was going on there. But Victoria Nuland has been right at the center of the problem we're having in Ukraine. It turns out that she was basically functioning as a deputy secretary of state, but under the aegis, if you will, of John Brennan. Now, Brennan was the director of CIA at the time. Now, they brought him on knowing full well he was a communist. So we now have a communist CIA that's out of control, that's screaming Russia, Russia, Russia. At the same time, they're antagonizing the hell out of them, of course, with the help of Victoria Nuland, who tends to lie 90% of the time and tell the truth about 3% of the time. And the rest of the time, I don't know what she does. Maybe we don't want to know. And yeah, they've been antagonizing and training militants in the Donbass and Luhansk area, all the way down to the Crimea, all the way back to 2013. Now, we know that there were other things going on even farther back with respect to banking when the Greek banks started to fail down back in 2008, and they started having to find new places to run their offshore banking.
William,
yeah.
we busted out the big Bank of Cyprus back around that time. And I think that's the Greek banks you're talking about. And it was trying to be the World Economic Forum, tried to make the one world bank to start in Cyprus. And because it didn't work and we caught them, I don't know what happened. I don't know if it went to Italy or another country, but that's, oh boy, that was when we first started the show.
Well, they wanted central banking using digital currencies. That's what they were hoping for. What they ended up with was a collapse of the Greek economy and having the savings of the Greek people and even their paychecks, portions of it confiscated just to keep the banks afloat, which was terrible. And that's the concern of what could happen in the United States into the future. So we have to kind of keep that on our mind. Well, people in the world need to be able to put their money in cash, right? Not just property. You could have a boat. Boats deteriorate. Cars, they're the worst investment in the world. Property it's okay as long as you don't have a building on it to deteriorate, right? So your other places to put it in investments or put it in cash or gold. Well, you to go cash or gold, that's pretty much, you got to have a bank for that. Well, where are you going to store that where it's not going to be taxed by the government you're most worried about being taxed by? Well, it used to be the Cayman Islands. Then it was the Greek banks. Well, that moved, I think, for a period of time to some Muslim banking that even included Afghanistan. Wasn't that correct? Or Turkey or Afghanistan. Anyhow, then moved to Ukraine. And the follow-on is all the crazy stuff that happened after that, following all that
shenanigans
and as
I call it creepy ventures.
Evildoers
creepy
doing
ventures.
Financial actions so that they can take American tax money back to the United States and use it for political PACs and stuff like that. So just a bunch of nasty stuff. It was basically taking, like you could have businesses or corporations will attack each other, right? They have their little wars and they play their dirty tricks on each other. Well, governments do the same thing. They use the same tactics. The outcomes are kind of the same. It's just, instead of using profits, they use tax dollars. So that was happening. So as all this money funneled in to Turkey, into Ukraine, well, the Russian oligarchs took their money. They wanted to make some money too, right? All the Americans are doing it. The Westerners are doing it. Ukraine's next door. We're all good friends, right? So they export their cash, put that in the banks, and then, the banks do their investing, whatnot. And so Russia got a little bit poorer during that time when it could have been growing. And it's just like when they did the sanctions against Russia after Russia attacked Ukraine. Russia actually became richer. Was it because they started producing more? No, it's because the cash that they had was kept in the country by Putin. They couldn't export their cash to use it in the stock markets in foreign countries. So they had to invest in Russia, and how the Russian people lived got a lot better than before. So also because of that and the war, Russia has increased its manufacturing. Russia is now the largest manufacturer of heavy weapons in the world. They're bigger than United States manufacturing and Europe's manufacturing together. They are a powerhouse manufacturing. They produce, for every munition we produce, they produce 7. It's tremendous. And we have effectively created that. And we found out the other day that they're using, we found out in a Senate committee that they're using U.S. technology that's been transferred that's prohibited in their missiles, because Zelensky handed a paper to one of our senators, well, not a paper, an entire folder, to our senator with pictures of all this technology that's coming in on missiles that have attacked the United States. It attacked Ukraine, and they're Russian-marked missiles with U.S. and European guts in them. So it's pretty damning. So we have people making money by basically going around the rules and laws of the government. Okay? And how they do this is, you can't violate citizens' constitutional rights. Now, on MSNBC the other night, they talked about that the Christian MAGA zealots are tied to Trump, and they don't care about what happens, and that they believe that their rights come from God. And what they're trying to postulate is, well, no, rights come from the state. Now, if you look at the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, you'll find pretty quick that our rights come from God. It's right in the Declaration of Independence. They haven't read this. Okay, so that's happening. Moving on. We've had a problem with understanding genocide versus the rules of land warfare. We had an airman by the name of Aaron Bushnell. It turns out we found some more information about him. He was born and raised on Nantucket, right? They're on Cape Cod, right near Boston. It's pretty liberal. Think of Rosie O'Donnell, right? Pretty liberal. Then he joins the Air Force. He's an older guy, right? He's 25. He's just a senior airman now. So he's basically, he just went from a slick sleeve to one stripe to two stripes. Okay, he's not a sergeant yet. He's just a senior airman. Back in my day, he would be called an airman second class, but that's a different deal. They took away this second class part for us and made them senior airmen as two stripers rather than three stripers. Okay.
You still there?
Yeah, I'm just looking at this and I'm, pretty much confused myself suddenly. So the rules of land warfare in Israel, he thought because the amount of civilians dying in Gaza was a large amount in comparison to what he believed the losses were in places like Kuwait or in Iraq or in Afghanistan or perhaps Herzegovina and Bosnia, some of these wars we've been in. And the truth is, this isn't genocide. Now, there's an institute for the study of strategic, CSIS. Anyway, it's a think tank in D.C. about what land warfare is and how we get involved as far as how those were conducted. Now, Gaza has 2.2 million people, and there were thousands, right, affected in Israel when they were invaded. So Israel, because the neighbor, although a weaker neighbor, crossed the border and attacked them by all means, air, land, and sea. So that's an invasion, right? That's an attack. That's a border crossing. That's an act of war. So Hamas started a war. Now, according to the rules of land warfare, Israel has the right to crush Hamas. All right? To go to war with Hamas. Hamas attacked Israel, including Israeli military. Okay? It wasn't just civilians. They slaughtered Israeli military. they involved themselves all the way to the point of rape and mutilation, both alive and not alive, as an act of war. And why did they do this? What was the big concern? Well, Hamas is saying today that it was because Israel had talked about, the giving up of the flawless red heifer in the Bible that's supposed to happen before the temple, which happens before the Great Tribulation. Okay, here's the thing, guys. You have to have the temple first. There's no temple. Yeah, they're working on the red heifer, but no temple. So Hamas is saying that was the reason. What was truly the reason is Israel was about to sign an agreement with Saudi Arabia so that they would no longer engage in hostilities between each other and have some sort of economic exchange as far as manufacturing, sales. You guys get the idea. Just business and commerce in general. Well, Iran couldn't tolerate that, and so they pushed Hamas to the fore, and they went ahead and attacked Israel to stop that. Well, yeah, that happened. But here's the problem. According to the Palestinian medical people in Gaza, that they've had 30,000. Is it 30,000? Yeah, it's 30,000 Palestinians killed. So this Aaron Bushnell in Washington, D.C. was incensed by the fact that this genocide was going on. But the fact is, it isn't a genocide. If you go to the CSIS, they'll tell you that urban warfare is the worst kind of warfare you can get involved in. You have two choices. Basically what the United States and England did in Dresden, Germany, which is just bomb it till there's nothing left, firestorm it. Same thing that happened with Tokyo, to get the enemy to capitulate so that you don't have to fight every man and woman in the country.
William?
Well, yeah.
As far as the Third Temple, is the Muslims pushing a war to force Israel to speed up the Third Temple?
Well, okay. There's a group in Islamic, not theory, but study, right? They have their scholars that believe they can push time forwards so the return of God will happen. So for Islam, it's the return of the Mahdi, and for Israel, it's the return of the Savior, right? The great I am. So for Israel, it's the Savior, the great I am, the Christ, the one who defeated the power of Egypt. Remember, Egypt had the 7 different gods, and with Moses, the great I am destroyed each of those gods in the face of the people of Egypt through plagues. Anyway, this is a long story, but what we're talking about, this is biblical, all right? And this goes all the way back to the Prophet Muhammad. And then it goes to scholars that have looked into text all the way back into Persia, Zoroastrianism, even where they used the Tower of Babel was where it was in Iraq. Anyway, you you guys get the idea. This goes back many, many different world powers over time. And so, if you can't blame it on somebody else, who do you blame it on? Oh, the unseen. Great. Moving on, right? What do you think about that, Ellie?
Well, the Muslims live to their Quran, and that is to bring forth the third temple.
Yeah, but
that's all I have to say, and then you have to kind of move on from there, because that's just their stance. They want their Muhammad.
They're willing to fight over it, and by goodness they do. So according to land warfare, if you're attacked, you can assail your enemy across their entire landmass. So with respect to Gaza, it's the Gaza Strip. Now Israel has come to a point, because of this young man that set himself on fire, this airman, that President Biden has said that perhaps Israel's ready to have a ceasefire because they want to respect Islam's, right to their month of Ramadan, and allow the people of Gaza to be able to, adhere to their beliefs during Ramadan. Now, I don't know if one of the small things I know about Ramadan is the people don't eat all during the day, and only after the setting sun do they get to eat. Well, in a war zone without good shelter, no air conditioning nearby, having to haul your own water, bad sanitation, well, you guys get the idea. People are going to get sick, and people are going to die. So don't want that, but they want the captives back that were taken, the hostages. And remember, 2 of those hostages were U.S. citizens. Okay? It doesn't matter where they are. An attack on one U.S. citizen is an attack on all U.S. citizens. No matter where they are in the world, if they're innocent, and those people were innocent. So, while all that's going on, Israel says, we will do a ceasefire through Ramadan if you will return our hostages. And then after Ramadan, well, everything's up in the air. Hamas has said, well, yeah, that's what you want, but what we want is the end of the war, and you to go back to Israel and leave us alone. So that's pretty intractable. There's no real middle ground there, except for both sides want to be able to respect the religion in Ramadan. So how that's going to work out, we don't know. We know that the U.S. government came out, and Biden said that he believed there was a ceasefire perhaps going to happen a day or two after Mr. Aaron Bushnell took his life by immolation. He set himself on fire and he burned to death. Basically, he died as he got to the hospital, as he was screaming in pain and saying, free Hamas, free Hamas. He took a couple deep breaths, and of course he was completely consumed in flames when he did that, and flames and lung tissue don't go together well. He may have survived with most of his skin and whatnot, muscle tissue, inside of his military fatigues, but the lungs, they were exposed directly. So that's too bad for him. But I just want to tell you that Israel hasn't involved themselves in genocide. I'm not taking Israel's side or the Palestinian side, but what I am saying is Israel so far is conducting themselves by the rules of land warfare. Now, everybody knows that eventually people come to their breaking point, and they will commit atrocities. Okay, just like a person's going to only be tortured so far with horror, and they'll finally, if they're given a weapon, they'll go full Harry Carey. So it's the responsibility of Israel when this sort of thing starts to happen on their front line is to pull those troops back and replace them with different troops. We did the same thing during the Second World War. We'd send in one army, then we'd expel them after 15 days with a new group so they could recuperate, get refit, get a rest, so that they weren't completely broken down and on the very edge of their sanity, and then put them back into the fight when they were better able to cope. Some didn't, some got PTSD and what they called shell shock and never really came home. But to be able to work by the rules of land warfare, you have to control your military. Now, Hamas doesn't do that. They absolutely do not control their military. They give their military objectives. Whatever happens is good business. And yeah, that's sad. So it's too bad Mr. Aaron Bushnell took his life over something that's not happening. Genocide is what we saw that happened in Germany, in the death camps, where civilians were just brought into the death camps, people just trying to flee a war zone, right? They're just civilians. They're herded into camps. They either work them to death, they gas them, incinerate them, dispose of them, and a bunch of other terrible things. We have the gulags in Stalinist Russia, basically the same thing, work them to death. Free labor, a way to get a leg up monetarily in the communist system when there is no other economy. Great, let's do that. It's a good plan, except it's genocide. And we have people in the United States that are still, to this day investing in China, and China has a problem with the Uyghurs, and they're putting them into camps, and they're sterilizing the women, and people are getting worked to death and getting tortured to death, and lots of bad things are happening. We have also Falun Gong Christians. A lot of people have disappeared. So it's a horrible situation. And we've had freedom of entire groups of Hong Kong, for instance. England pulled out, right? They had a treaty that they could be there a certain period of time, and then it would return to Chinese rule. And Chinese didn't take kindly to them having the freedom of speech they had before, or the freedom of travel they had before, or being able to choose the things they want. What they wanted, what the Communist Party wants is, if I have a need in the Communist Party, I will send you where I want you to go, number one, and you will do what I want you to do when you get there. All right, it's not like you choose and maybe you want to be a nurse or maybe you want to be no, that's not how it works in a communist society. They have a need, it gets filled. If you happen to be the number, see you later. There is no democracy there. So, and then you had Pol Pot with the Khmer Rouge, and he took everybody that had glasses, that had an education, that was big in business, basically anybody that might be able to challenge the leadership of this little ragtag army and worked them to death in the basically death fields. They would chain them literally to a tree and work them to death. All right, that's genocide. So Israel's not involving themselves in that. What they are doing is trying to get the population to move out of the way. All right. Now, Hamas on the other side is saying, don't move, because if they move out of the way, guess what? Israel comes in, Hamas goes out. And they're trying to protect themselves. So is Hamas going to use the remnant population of Gaza that's more than 2 million as human shields or not? Well, they've always used human shields. So what are we to expect? So Israel has a problem. They're going to need to move those folks out of the way so that Hamas can be expelled. So either they have to fight through them. Remember, Hamas is fighting asymmetric warfare, so they're involved in guerrilla warfare when you're using standard troops. This is very difficult warfare because it's hit and run warfare. You never know where you're going to be hit from. Come from behind. Are you going to step on a booby trap? We had all this problem in Vietnam with the Viet Cong. Not with the North Vietnamese regulars, but with the Viet Cong. Guerrilla warfare. It's a terrible way to have to fight, because you literally spend all your time the state of heightened awareness, looking in the shadows. And then you do that for a year trying to survive, or 2 years, and you come back home and they think you're a little off because your eyes are constantly moving, always assessing your surroundings. And then your wife gets a little upset because, well, yeah, you're sleeping, but your eyes are open and they're scanning the room. That's kind of the horrors of that type of warfare. And given all that's happened, Israel's been pretty responsible. You know, they're not perfect. War is not perfect. War is, well, hell in all its many facets. But the leadership of Israel has tried to be responsible with respect to their war, to the point of trying to get the Palestinians in southern Gaza to go back up into northern Gaza, because Israel's moved 2/3 through Gaza now. And now they need to take care of the bottom third, and that's, of course, where all the people are. So I have a message to the women and the children and the husbands, fathers, daughters, mothers. Please leave that area. As a military member, I realize what can happen to you. There is nothing good that can come of it if you stay where you're at. It doesn't look like there's any ability for negotiation on this, as far as Hamas being able to continue being part of the Palestinian government. And if you put your bodies in the way, you'll put your lives on the line. And there's a good chance you're going to go through the dregs, the absolute dregs of war. You've already been through the privation. Please don't watch your families die around you. There's nothing worse. Okay. And to the fighters in Israel, please be judicious. Be aware. come back with your integrity still intact, so you can live your life with happiness and not always asking yourself for the rest of your life, what if? That question is a soul killer. And if you put yourself in a position where you go through the rest of your life saying, what if I had done this rather than that? If you do your very best each and every day and try to stay aware, you've done your part. Okay. So, yeah, land warfare, what a terrible thing. Now, it turns out we're not having the same sequence of events in Ukraine. Now, Ukraine is basically a civil war, just like Hamas and Israel is involved right now in a civil war. They've always lived next to each other. They're both from different cultures. The same thing's happening in Ukraine. But the difference here is a much larger force attacked a smaller force. So Russia attacked Ukraine. In Gaza, a much smaller force attacked a much larger force. So they brought ruin upon themselves. Now it appeared that Russia attacked Ukraine without being provoked, but it turns out we had these laboratories, CIA sites, training combatants all the way back to 2013. People who held ideas that go all the way back to their grandfathers in World War II and not Nazism. We had George Soros, I hate to use his name, but he was there with one of his NGOs. Okay. Now, George Soros was a young Jewish man during World War II. And he could have been swept up and sent to the death camps. Now, they didn't really know about the death camps, but his father thought something bad was about to happen. You know, you got your spidey sense. And he told George, look, you're going to pretend to be a Christian. And so by being a Christian, then he could help the Nazis find the wealth of the Jewish people and where the Jewish people were hiding and turn them over to the SS to go to the camps. So you had Nazis helping Nazis. And you had Victoria Nuland that was basically brought in by Dick Cheney, the vice president of George Bush the Younger, after her education. And she had ties to bad things that had happened to her parents and whatnot, all the way back into, you know, before World War II. And so she's got a family history motivation, if you will. And she's tied to the State Department. The State Department is like the outward manifestation of diplomacy. Then there's an underground type of diplomacy, if you will, that happens between secret services. And they're basically the dirty tricks department. And when diplomacy and dirty tricks department fails, then they bring in folks like me, and they bring in the regular military as going to war. So war is the last bastion of political power. Anybody that enters into a war as a leader will never come out of the war in the manner they believe they will. Leaders don't control war. War controls leaders. Just like if you have absolute power, likelihood is you'll become corrupted absolutely. You probably heard that saying. If you just have some power, then you'll just be corrupted some. Sending the military to war is absolute power. It makes you a warlord. You're expending your country's treasure and your country's blood in pursuit of political needs. Now, Russia had a valid point with respect to the Donbass and Luhansk and Crimea, in that Russian-speaking and Ukrainian-speaking people were harming each other. And because that wasn't Russian territory, Russia couldn't intervene constantly. Now, back in 2014, Russia just went into, I believe it was just south of the Donbass, and made an opportunity for Russian speakers to come to Crimea, because Ukraine had created a law that said you can no longer speak Russia if you're in Ukraine. You have to speak the Ukrainian language. And that was very offensive to people who had lived there for, tens and 20s of generations as Russian speakers, being on the same plot of land, being handed down, family, son to daughter. You get the idea. Father to son, all the way back into early history. Well, during the time of the Soviet Union, Ukraine was part of Russia. And that happened right after the Germans were pushed out of Ukraine. All right? And there were partisans that didn't go along with the Germans who fought with the Russians. All right? So that would have been the other group. So there were actually Ukrainians fighting Ukrainians on behalf of states on either side that were attacking each other. And after the war's end, okay, and Russia decided that they were going to stop United States, France, and England from being able to enter into their portion of Berlin, which started the beginning of the Iron Curtain and the Berlin airlift. So commerce stopped between Russia and the West at that time. And 8 million Ukrainians starved to death in famine. In the most fertile soil on earth. You can plant a tire in Ukrainian soil and almost expect it to grow. It is the best soil on earth. It's the breadbasket of the world. And Khrushchev saw that had happened under Stalin. And he was a later leader than Stalin. He wanted to liberalize the Soviet Union a little bit so that people could have a little better life, right? Of course, it was at the same time of greater military industrialization. But on the other hand, the people of Ukraine had suffered. So Khrushchev, I can't remember if it was just before or just after the Cuban Missile Crisis here in the United States. So that was between the President of the United States, John F. Kennedy, and Khrushchev, right? Well, this very Khrushchev gave to the Ukrainian people the land of Ukraine. He returned it back to them and made it its very own state. And, after the fall of the Soviet Union, we promised Russia that, and we promised Ukraine that we wouldn't let Russia attack them because they were going to hand over the nuclear weapons that Ukraine had to Russia. We wanted all the most deadly weapons of mass destruction controlled by a single country that knew how to deal with those weapons, knew what to do with them, how to keep them safe, how to keep them protected, how to keep them from falling into the black market hands. Weapons-grade uranium plutonium is the most dangerous stuff on the planet. It is the most toxic poison on Earth. And it's a toxin that lasts, a half-life. It gets to a half potency over millions of years. So it's not like something that evaporates or Agent Orange that makes its way back into the environment after a couple generations. No, this is stuff that ends people's health for perpetuity, longer than we have history of the species, right? Terrible stuff. Wanted to keep under one country, and so we made a deal with these smaller countries like Poland, like Ukraine, Slovenia, the weapons that had been dispersed to them were going to go back to Russia, and we would see that Russia wouldn't use their ability to field nuclear weapons as a way to shield them from being attacked conventionally, meaning just kinetic weapons, sticks and stones, bullets, right? Yeah. Then we had some other stuff that was happening. This was right after Desert Storm. The United States was a very powerful military. Then we got to the Clinton administration. They stood down our alert aircraft around the world. They did things like they were going to reduce the military by moving different military bases back together. So you ended up with, like here in Washington, McChord, Fort Lewis. And so the administration of like police on that is done by just one of the militaries, and then one of the organizations, and then logistics, food services done by another, and shared responsibility, right? And it was called BRAC. It was to reduce the size of the military and get what was called the peace dividend, because there was not going to be any more land warfare in history. Everybody knew it, because they lived through World War I and World War II. Of course, there couldn't be a World War III. Mistake. Moving on. So,
William, oh boy, this is a weird question. Now, the Clinton to Bush era with the foreign, we signed into, was it the Paris Accord? I don't think it's the Paris Accord, but we signed foreign policies in during that where Trump wasn't in agreement with it. Am I wrong, or I'm just,
So Trump back in those days was actually liberal. He wasn't a complete conservative yet. Now, he sympathized with John Kennedy, right? With his George magazine, you remember that time. But he hadn't completely comprehended what we we were involved in yet. I think that came through his
Was it
business.
NATO or was it the Paris Accord? I just can't remember which foreign policy we put in that he was against.
We did the Oz Accords with Israel between Yasser Arafat and I think it was Rabin at Camp David, and the Paris Accords. Was it Paris? No, I think it was another accord.
I think it was NATO. Because I know he pulled out of NATO, but something else. We might have to talk about it further for tomorrow.
We did have there was a treaty that said that we wouldn't let Russia come and attack you if you turned over your nuclear weapons. Because basically a nuclear weapon is not an offensive weapon. You don't toss those first. That's the last thing you use before the end of your existence. Right? That's a way to punish your enemy the way your enemy's punishing you. You can't win. It's called mutually assured destruction. Nobody wins, but everybody loses at least. Instead of there being one winner and one loser. You know, since we dropped the atom bomb in Japan, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we're so sorry we felt we had to do that. We did save possibly millions of Japanese lives, but we took thousands and thousands of Japanese lives. That day, history changed. For 70 years, we haven't had a world war. But we've had 70 years to figure out how to dominate the world back to a one world order again. World War II was about Germany becoming the new Rome for 1,000 years. The Third Reich, they called it. And Asia, Japan controlling Asia the same way that Rome dominated the world for 1,000 years. That's what they were trying to do. Okay. Well, China, Russia, Iran, to a lesser degree, more fence wire type people. You have India, Pakistan, caught between the two big groups that want to be the one world government. Now, the United States doesn't want to be the one world government. We end up being the policeman for the world, but we want people to choose their own governments, and we would like them to stay within their borders and not harass their neighbors. So keep their culture, do business the way they want, follow the religions how they feel, but don't attack their neighbor and don't engage in piracy on the open seas in international waters to obstruct commerce. The United States hates nothing more in the world than having one of its boats hit. You start hitting American ships, and pretty soon you will be in a serious war with the United States. It just depends on which president and how many times you strike a ship, but eventually America hates its boats being hit. We went to war with Libya all the way back in the 1700s over it. The Marines went into Tripoli and basically said, give us our money back, give us our boats, stay out of our way, don't engage in piracy or we'll come back and kill you all. So they kind of had a treaty, right? We won't engage in piracy anymore. So we don't like having our boats hit, taken, harassed. We want to engage in commerce, and we want other nations to be able to freely engage in commerce, because that lifts all tides. That makes all people have a better lifetime. during the Dark Ages, things were pretty grim. And the Industrial Revolution has really helped our lives. It's alienated us from each other in a lot of ways, but it's made our lives a lot less miserable. And that's basically through commerce. We have our neighborhood grocers and our neighborhood automobile dealer and the local manufacturing company to thank for that. Some here, some on the other side of the world. But that's business. Business has lifted even the poorest in the world 20 and 30 times the amount of available resources that they had before. Life was pretty grim before World War I. So, Ellie, this antagonization by the CIA, I believe it has been on the Russian border. Now, remember, Russia has a long history of being invaded. I mean, not one or two times, bloody times every 50 years or so. From the French, from the English, from the Mongols, from the Germans, from Sweden, from all sides. And they've been able to fight people back, but it's always been at a terrible, terrible cost. And usually involved a lot of ice and a lot of frozen bodies. And we're not talking just frozen people, we're talking about frozen animals. It's ugly when the thaw comes. So they have in their history a reason to be very leery of any military forces coming near their border. And the United States promised them that NATO wouldn't come there. But the EU, which is an economic cooperative, not a military cooperative, decided they were going to move in lock, stock, and barrel. The MI6 and CIA were going to help them. And Victoria Nuland was going to be the ringleader. Well, that was great. But then bankers, financial people, Klaus Schwab and his group decided, you know what? If we could just get the leadership out of Russia, we could own all of Russia too, right? And then we would own the center of the world. Europe has a belief that if they hold the center of Asia, landlocked Asia, that is in history the center of the world, basically where Mongolia is right now, that they can then spread out. And so the leader of the world, a one world government, would come from a place like Mongolia under leadership from, but they would be German leadership, or they would be Swiss leadership, or Austrian leadership, or even Israeli leadership, or you've got Iran wanting to do the same thing. You've got China wanting to do the same thing. You see, it's all around there. Russia isn't wanting to do that. Russia has just been through 70 years of hell. 100 years ago, they went through 70 years of hell, so they've been, 30 years since communism. I'm a Cold Warrior. I was one of the people that, broke the back of the Soviet Union. We put them through hell. It wasn't a joke. And they have a reason to fear. It's a serious reason. And Putin and Medvedev, all the way from, and this comes from their secret services. It comes from leaders all the way back to Gorbachev, down to Putin, and many, many people in Russia really are thankful that they've had Putin. Putin has stabilized their country more than Russia has been stable almost in what, 40 years, 30 years now? Russia was never like politically stable for an entire 30 years. It was always involved in upheavals. So the people of Russia like Putin. Now this guy that just died in the prison there, people of Germany really idolized him. They believed he could go to Russia and he could be one of the people who could edge Putin out of the way. Now, they blame Putin for killing this guy that was in prison, right? That was going to be a leader against him. But he is only polling 2%. So even though the Germans had high hopes, the reality was he couldn't win anyway. And Putin wasn't interested. There's no reason for him to take the guy's life. He's just not enough of a threat. And it turns out, according to Ukrainian intelligence, that the guy died in a Russian prison from a blood clot. He just went out for a walk. He threw a clot, and that was that. And so, yeah. So we've had, 5 or 6 days of this guy being assassinated in the Western press, but they were wrong. They got it wrong. And Ellie and I said, well, we don't really know what's going on. We'll probably know more into the future. And yeah, that's kind of what happened. So when the enemy of Russia, intelligence, comes out and says, no, Russia wasn't involved in it, you can pretty much take that to the bank. Now, you can't believe anything each other says otherwise because they're involved in a war. But when the other side backs up the enemy that they're involved in military hostilities over, you can pretty much take that single piece of information to the bank. So there's a lot of implications for our government here in the United States over these 12 sites and also the laboratories that were found in Ukraine, as well as the business contacts, Nord Stream 1 and 2, shenanigans between people who believe that have the National Socialist belief versus people who had come from communism and want that thrown off and don't like National Socialists much any better than communism because, well, they end up the same place, right? Starvation. So we have a problem here in the United States in that they want to send $60 billion to Ukraine to keep this war going. Now, where Israel is involved in what we call righteous war because they're involved in the correct tenets of land warfare. Forcing a war to go on with no motivation as to its end or its disposition in any way is just throwing away lives. Not only is it throwing away lives, in a civil war, they are willing to consume every weapon on earth before they will stop, and then they will beat each other with sticks and stones. And finally, get right down to fisticuffs. They will fight each other till there is absolutely no resources left. So, the U.S. Senate has proposed a bill that would give aid to Ukraine, aid to Israel, aid to Taiwan. The Taiwan aid I absolutely agree with. If they want to give it to Israel, I'm okay with that. I'm not okay with Ukraine because I'm not interested in loss of life for no pertinent reason. This thing has already run its course. Ellie and I talked about this over a year ago. This is where it would finally end up. And what it turns out is, you know, the Senate didn't see this coming. The government didn't see this coming. So we're engaging in proxy war, right? And now we've got a group of American people with political power in the House, right? And the Speaker of the House is a guy by the name of Mike Johnson. Well, he got the job because the last Speaker got literally thrown out of office. And Mike Johnson's saying, I'm not going to bring this spending bill to the floor to even be voted on. Why? Because it doesn't stop the hemorrhage that's happening on our border. People from foreign countries coming into our border where we have mail-in ballots and we don't know if they're voting illegally in our country with, 10 to 20 million people from all over the world. We don't know who they are, right? We want to have voting integrity, number one, and we want to be able to protect the jobs for the working class people of the United States. We don't want to be pulled down to third world levels of being able to make money, because you can't pay for loans for, a decent house and keep your family fed. And citizens have done all the hard work in creating the United States and bringing it up and out of obscurity, if you will, and being an aid to the rest of the world. But we're not an aid to people who want to rule the world with absolutely one world rule. One government, one military, one foot on everybody's neck. And especially it's bad because these groups also want to depopulate the earth by 90%. So,
William, we got a question of it has to do with uranium. Now, is it a natural resource? Is it natural or is it made?
So uranium is found in ores. Now, you'd be surprised, but ores come in things like, have you ever seen kitty litter? And it's kind of a clay stuff, and the cat does their thing in it. Well, actually, that's the type of ores that uranium is found in. Now, it's not found in high concentrations. Okay, so it has to be leached out, and then based on different evaporations, then they come to a thing that's called yellow cake. And they can get to 6, 7, 8% ore. And then that stuff has to be enriched to be able to be used 30% for atomic energy, or to 90% to become weapons grade. And going from 30 to 90%, you'd think it was just takes, an extra 2/3 time, but it's not. It's on the bell curve, so it actually takes almost 10 times as much work to get it to weapons grade. So uranium is found as an ore. It's just an element on Earth. It's on the periodic table. Now, plutonium, on the other hand, there are very, very, very small traces of plutonium on Earth, but there are no real ore deposits. How we get plutonium is we use what's called a breeder reactor, a uranium reactor that causes fission and gets you towards a product that's called plutonium. And high-grade plutonium, high-grade uranium, they basically have the same power. What's different is if you add to it, it's an atomic bomb like in World War II was what they called fission. So it was matter that was pulled apart. So all the work you use to combine the uranium would be let loose at one instant. So you use, you know, megawatts and megawatts and megawatts of powers to run these through the process, right? And you have to turn it to a gas. It's a long, almost debilitating process. And then afterwards, it's got to be run through the milling process. So it's got to be melted down. It's got to be made into certain forms. A lot of people at U.S. Steel lost their lives because they didn't know that they weren't using regular steel ore. They were milling uranium, and they only did a little bit of uranium, and a lot of them died from cancer almost right away because we didn't understand it very well during World War II. So yeah, it's found in the ground, and then if you want to have plutonium, you need a special kind of reactor called a breeder reactor. So fission happens with the old bomb. Then they take fission, so you use an explosion to cause the uranium to get, or plutonium to get squeezed so much that it causes a chain reaction between the atoms in the uranium. And when that chain reaction happens fast enough and furious enough, the uranium flies apart. And where the energy comes from is energy, let's see. So mass is made from energy over a time constant, okay? E equals mc squared. Well, it just happens that when this uranium flies apart, when you measure what's left after the explosion, there's a small amount of mass missing. Well, that very, very small amount of mass that's missing is converted directly to energy. And that's what you see in a nuclear weapon like Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And those bombs were very large. They were not clean. As time has gone on, we've created a little cleaner bombs, but the half-life of radiation is so long, it's almost not even worth having a discussion over. You just don't want nuclear radiation spilled into out of any containment field. Now, we came to much, much bigger bombs that were 10, 100 times bigger, more powerful than the original bombs at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And what we did was we started first the chemical reaction that squeezes the uranium. The uranium explodes and goes into a liquid and a base metal that then fuses. So instead of having fission breaking apart, it causes it to combine. And when it causes it to combine, you get the exact same thing that happens on the sun. When you get two hydrogen atoms become a helium atom, you create a fusion furnace like the sun. So when uranium bomb released the energy of matter back into energy, the hydrogen bomb combined matter and made a heavier atom, which was smaller than all of its parts. And what was left over is radiated out just like the sun radiates, right? So we've harnessed basically now the power of the sun. Now the next frontier is antimatter. And so you hear about Higgs boson, you hear about all these different super colliders, and what they're trying to do is create antimatter. You know, antimatter doesn't make you a planet killer. It makes you a solar system killer. So they've gone from a city killer basically to planetary capacity of destruction, and when they have capacity to use antimatter and use it in a weapon, then they'll have the power to destroy a solar system. And so that's what science is moving towards. All warfare right now has to do with getting one leg up on the enemy with respect to technology and how you use that technology. Everything you use in your world, like in your home, is an outgrowth of warfare. So you take somebody that's like me in the military. When I walk into a house, I don't see a microwave, I don't see a refrigerator, I don't see chemicals under the stove to clean the bathtub, right? I see a collection of things I can use to make weapons. Because that's what the military does. It destroys its enemy, and it will use any capacity at its disposal. Well, you can't keep things secret forever. Your computer came from the military-industrial complex. It actually started out, this is going to make you a little disturbed. IBM started out to keep track of all the things that the SS was doing with respect to experiments done on human beings in the gas chambers. So when you get on your laptop, the original reason that tubes and electrical power was being used was to keep track of all the data, of all the things that were going on in the work camps and in the laboratories of the SS. Then the United States, after the war, we took the technology and we kept track of all the things we used so we could tell the government where each and every one of the things are that the military is supposed to have, number one. And number two, it told the military where its assets could be found on all the different bases. So when you needed a repair part, they would be able to source that part if there was an extra one anywhere else in the world on a military base, rather than have one made. Now, if it was cheaper to have one made nearby, they would do that, but they tried to always use the parts they had on hand. So we used it that way. Then it got spilled out. Now, if people think for a minute that there was this guy that came up with this don't do evil in a garage that came up with this Apple computer thing, and then it was back engineered by these people at IBM, and they put a DOS system on that they basically bought from somebody else, and it happened all organically and had nothing to do with the government. Well, it's kind of a fairy tale, I'm just telling you. The reason your knives are sharp and stay sharp were originally to kill other human beings. The Industrial Revolution was about creating the ability to create more war stuffs than your enemy. The North beat the South in the Civil War because it had more manufacturing capacity. The United States was able to help England and Russia dominate Germany because we had a manufacturing capacity that wasn't being directly attacked. And so in the process, we were able to manufacture things faster than anybody else in the world. And we became, because of it, a reluctant superpower. The United States didn't want to be a superpower. it didn't want to go into World War II. Not until we were attacked by the Japanese did we enter World War. And then the next day, Germans declared war on the United States. We didn't declare war on Germany or Japan first. We didn't want to be the last guy with a big military and lots of airplanes and ships and jeeps and tanks coming out of our rear ends, right, after the war. Everybody else's economy had been decimated. We were feeding the world at this point. We had to go to the Marshall Program to keep the Germans from starving to death. And if the Russians would have told us that the Ukrainians were starving to death at the same time that the West Germans were starving to death, we'd have fed them too. But they kept it a secret because we were becoming enemies. And later on, when there were some people from the United States that did manufacturing, we sent a lot of weapons to Russia. Now, Russia lost a lot of human life, but they were able to stay in the war because we sent them so much weaponry and trucks. Ford built a truck plant. We were sending things from Alaska across Australia, go on the railroad, come all the way across Russia. You know, I think it's 12 time zones or 7 time zones, something like that. We kept Russia in the war. But then we became enemies as soon as the squabble over Berlin happened, and they tried to block us out of Berlin. Then they weren't Russia anymore. They started becoming the Soviet Union. And we had a Cold War over it. We almost came to real war. You guys don't know it, but if you go to what's the name of it? I can't remember it right now. But in 1983, we almost became ash during the Cold War. People believe that there were not people dying in the military during the Cold War. They just weren't reported. They weren't reported. There were constant small skirmishes and harassments. We came almost at the gate of, I can't remember the name of the gate in Berlin. We had our army's tanks, and the Soviet Union and Russia had all their tanks lined up, and all it would have took is a single small arms fire, and that would have been it. We'd have been off to the races. So we used our industrial power and our military prowess to bankrupt the Soviet Union, to make it so that its people were so hopeless that they no longer wanted to maintain their government. And all we did was let our economy breathe. And while we let our economy breathe, we scared each other at the same time. And because of the fear, the military fear that we induced in the Soviet Union, they started an arms race. And they didn't have the capacity to produce all those weapons and feed their population at the same time. So that's how the war was won. And then the very last thing was they saw the United States fight the world's 4th largest army and best surface-to-air weapons system in of Saddam's army, right? The Iraq Army and Republican Guard, and decimate them. And that just shocked both China and Russia. And so there was that. And then a half a year later, there was this silly rock concert. There was glasnost going on, and so there was cultural exchange. So they had this rock concert at an air base near Moscow, and 1.2 or 1.6 million people showed up. And it was a Monsters of Rock and Roll, and it went on a whole day. And there were these emotional releases that happened during rock concerts. Well, the Soviet Union had been controlled by secret police and stuff. They hadn't witnessed any of this stuff in 70 years, right? And so they started cracking down. 22 people died at the concert, mostly by beatings from the Russian government. But it was just because they didn't know what to expect. They didn't know that was just a celebration. Let them go. They'll knock each other's heads. That's what they do in mosh pits and stuff like that. So it was a new experience for them. There were helicopters flying over. But that hailed the final cultural end of the Soviet Union. And one of the reasons that happened was because you had Russian flags flown right next to U.S. flags and British flags and French flags. They had lost the confidence of all the youth in the country. And the elders wanted their children to have a better future. And the United States didn't want to attack Russia. We just wanted them to quit being communists and being willing to expand and subjugate everybody else under communism. Best way to stop communism is containment. It's not fighting them, it's just containment. Communism cannot survive without constant growth. It lives off the land, if you will. Once you get involved with communism, with this top-down society, they can't fully support themselves. They have to keep eating up other countries around them and living off them until they become a one-world government, right? They could become a one-world government, but it would only last a short time because then they would run out of resources, and then they would go into civil war. It would just be dog eat dog, neighbor eat neighbor. So we don't want to see that. I like nationalism. It keeps a plurality of cultures. It's kind of a bulwark against extremes, if you will. There's always an antidote idea that can be found someplace else in the world with an idea. But you don't get there by just taking everything you know and deciding to reinvent everything from the ground up. Why reinvent the wheel? Why not stand on the shoulders of giants? Because when you stand on the shoulders of giants and you use your intellect and you use your cleverness, you can make a lot of people's lives better. So Reagan did that. And George Bush did that with the military by letting the people of Kuwait move back to their homes and have their own government. We just made a mistake when we went to Afghanistan and Iraq and tried to do nation building. Basically, tell people how to create their own government. They already had a government, they just didn't like the leader they had. But we didn't have to remove the entire party the leader was in. You just had a problem with the leader, right? Well, the United States decided to take out the entire government, not just the leader, And so they had to build a government from scratch. Well, guess what? People create the government for the most part that they want. You just have a bad apple come along once in a while that makes it the top that needs to be moved out of the way. So if you're in a Muslim country and you're a Western democracy, do not try to engage in nation building. Islamic people like theocracies that support Sharia law that have to do with the teachings of Muhammad. And none of that has to do with democracy. That has to do with madrasas. So you might be successful for a few days, but you'll need an army constantly involved with peacekeeping, because you'll have continual rebel uprisings, and it's just asymmetric warfare. You're fighting against guerrilla war, and so if you have to devastate an enemy to take a leader out, then you have to do that. To make a political point, then you have to do that. But don't do nation building. We didn't do nation building after Kuwait. We brought back the leaders of Kuwait that had fled the country and let them build their own nation. They're still happy to this day. They've helped the United States a number of times. They allow Marines to be garrisoned in their country just out of Thanksgiving, and they also engage in commerce with the United States. We had a right to go into Afghanistan to go after Al Qaeda because the Taliban were shielding them, but it was a mistake to try to change the rule of Afghanistan with the Taliban. Now, if there was a leader that was being particularly brutal, we may have been able to help them a little bit, but we shouldn't have stayed for nation building. We could have built a military base. They stayed outside that. We have a lily pad there in the world, and we make a deal with the Taliban that we're able to use a road coming out of Pakistan, right? We could have had a military base there, and that would have been fine. Then the people would have had some security that if everything went terribly bad, the Americans might step in, and so the Taliban wouldn't be quite as brutal. But the people want the government for the most part they get. And believe it or not, Hamas and the Palestinians, that was the government they wanted. They're suffering from the choices they made. And it's terrible. Nobody wants people to suffer. These were choices, 15, 16 years ago. They didn't know down the line what would happen from it. Most people can't project what will happen in the future. Almost always, militaries get caught flat-footed when a war starts. Almost always, intelligence agencies get caught when a war starts. They're not good at predicting. People aren't good at predicting the future. We know what's happened in the past. It tends to rhyme a little bit with the future. Wars never end. They tend to go to sleep and then reassert themselves. So, yeah, this is kind of how the world works. There's nothing wrong. So, yeah, look at Bongino with his show today. It's excellent. It explains the ramifications with the U.S. government. And there's a couple of other shows that explain some other things that are going on that they were able to pick up with respect to these leaks from the CIA about these military bases, CIA military bases. The Russian government already knew about it. The Ukrainian government already knew about it. It's just American people didn't find out until the other day. And the reason they didn't find out was because, well, they're trying to make a case that we need to send the $60 million to Ukraine right now because their program is running into problems. But the real problem is they forgot to tell the American people the thing was happening in the first place, and the president didn't want to bend with respect to the southern border of the United States. The people of the United States that want to take care of the United States first, they don't want to take care of other people's borders until they take care of our own borders. And that's a valid argument. So here's Judge Napolitano with Matthew Ho. Judge Napolitano today with Lieutenant Colonel Kwiatkowski. Then you've got the Dan Bongino show, and it's about the 12 military bases. You've also got, if you guys know about Les Friedman, he was with Tucker Carlson, talked about some of the revelations they found out. And let's see, Greenwald, he had a terrific expose. Now he's down in Brazil right now, but the information he has backs up the information that the rest of this group has. We told you about this yesterday, and I said I was going to go into it deep, do a deep dive and timeline, but it's already been done by other groups that have a lot deeper staffs than we have here at Investigators News 2. But we got you the information first, so you're at least not surprised by it. Now you can go look and listen to it, and from the information I've given you today, you'll have a better understanding of how it affects the world and the U.S. government to a degree. These guys will explain it in bitter detail, and we'll have more information for you that have to do with military changes that are happening here with our force structure tomorrow in the World War III report. And so, Ellie, I'm done for today. It's been an hour and 40 minutes. I was hoping to do 45, and now I'm an hour and 40, so I'm so sorry.
It's okay. So that's okay. Subscribe and like and hit the bell for notifications.
So, same time tomorrow, I guess.
Yes.
Same bat channel. That's what we used to listen to on TV as kids. That was pretty funny. Yeah. Like, subscribe, share. We don't always get the absolute finest pinpoint of all the information, but we'll try to get how that information fits in to how the rest of the world will act and react, and as well as the government of the United States, how it will act and react, and where you could expect your location to be affected by it. And that's really what we're trying to do, is give you information that makes your life less chaotic and more understandable. And when you have knowledge like that, you then have power. Knowledge is power. And there's plenty of people that will report in excruciating detail, but they don't tell you what the ramifications are over the horizon, by years. And we try to do that. So that's what we do on the World War III report. We really talk about world power dynamics. And so we'll be talking about more of this and how it will affect what you see going on with conflicts or the lack thereof into the future, and what the chances are. Things like civil war, which are terrible in any country, and global warfare, which spins out of control, gets beyond the control of all contesting countries. And so we can kind of help you predict if that's going to happen or not going to happen, and we can allay some of your fears, especially about nuclear warfare, because it's just the thing that nations do as last resort, and nobody survives it. So they're not going to get involved with it. That means neutron bombs, that means electromagnetic bombs, that means plutonium, hydrogen, uranium bombs. Nobody's going to do that, because it's an absolute way to end your civilization. And when one tosses them, everybody's going to toss them. Because if you get caught not tossing yours and they toss theirs, they may win. And you don't want people to win after you've been completely destroyed. You at least want them to lose as big as you lose. That's the deterrence. It's scary, scary stuff. If you want to look at Global Strike Command, they got a little 3-minute ditty on it, and you can watch it. It explains what their reasons for being is, and it's horrifying. You'll never forget it if you watch it. And if you've ever been part of those groups, well, yeah, like, subscribe. We'll see you tomorrow. We hope you have a good evening. And, you know, it's 4:44 here on the West Coast, and Miki and I have got to go to the potty place because she's waiting. She's looking at me. So we'll see you tomorrow. Have a good evening.